And welcome to the Texas Talks podcast. I'm your host, Brad Swale. I want to welcome you to another conversation in our Future of Texas podcast series, where we talk with leaders who are thinking about the decisions shaping Texas between now and the state's bicentennial in 2036. Texas now has more than 31 million residents, and the state continues to grow rapidly. That growth brings enormous opportunity, but it also raises important questions about housing, infrastructure, and how our major metropolitan regions evolve. Increasingly, researchers say Texas isn't just growing city by city, but through large connected economic regions. One example is the rapidly expanding corridor between Austin and San Antonio. I drove that this morning, which some analysts describe as an emerging megaregion. This area is over 5 million today and projected to add roughly the population size of Chicago by 2050. And according to one of our guests today, Henry Cisneros, former U.S. Secretary of Housing and Urban Development and former mayor of San Antonio. He's the co-author of the new book, The Austin-San Antonio Megaregion, and co-author of The Texas Triangle, which explores how Texas's largest metropolitan regions are shaping the state's future. Also joining us is AJ Rodriguez, Executive Vice President of Texas 2036, where he oversees external affairs, strategic partnerships, board relations, and more. Secretary Cisneros, AJ, thank you so much for both of you for being here.
Brad, thank you.
Thank you.
It's truly my pleasure. I'm excited to talk about this. It's one of those things that, I grew up in Austin, and I've seen, how not only Austin has grown, I've also lived in San Antonio. So I've sort of experienced both, and it is growing a lot, and there's a lot in the middle.
And there's a lot around it beyond just the corridor.
For sure. And, the San Marcos, the New Braunfels, all of those different, used to be tiny little dots are now, much more flourishing, coming into their own, having their own identities. It's a really interesting time.
And then there's Williamson County to the north.
Absolutely.
Which is destined to be 1 million people or so by 2050.
Oh, wow.
2050 sounds like a long time from now, but it's 24 years from this moment. If you can remember what you were doing in 2000, that's 26 years ago.
Yeah.
24 more, Williamson County is going to be about 1 million people, and the region will be 8.3 million people.
Yeah, and we also, of course, have the Texas Triangle. Dallas, Austin, San Antonio, Houston, El Paso out in the west. The southern the Rio Grande Valley is growing as well.
Texas has 26 metropolitan statistical areas. That's the census definition of a region that has more than 150,000 people. We have 26 of them. More than any state in the country, but for California, which is, I think, 28. So the point is, people think of this as a rural state, as a ranching state, as an oil and gas state, but it's increasingly a very urban state.
Yeah.
Never before in the history of the United States has a state had 4 cities ranked in the top 10 most populous. And now we have Houston, San Antonio, Dallas, and Austin, and Fort Worth, the 5th, right on the edge of the top 10. So any doubt about the urban character of this state or the preparation that we have to do for that urban character, there shouldn't be any doubt.
Yeah, and I'm sure with all of that growth, we're going to have a lot of issues with a lot of issues that I think are tackleable. We can certainly approach them with sound policy regarding housing, infrastructure. How do we keep all of those people in the state of Texas and thriving as Texans?
And really, it's not a choice question, because some people would say, well, can we do anything to stop this growth or slow this growth? And it's really kind of out of our control. First of all, there's the Texas business climate that continues to attract businesses. There is the legend of Texas as a place where people can come and make a future. There is the workforce, which is large and young. There is the tax climate. There is the open space and potential to grow. We're not, for example, Austin, San Antonio is not inhibited by a seashore or a mountain range that would keep us from growing. So it's not a question of whether this state is going to grow. It's a question of whether we prepare. That's the simple choice before us, pure and simple.
Yeah, absolutely. So AJ, I just want to get your thoughts as we're sort of opening up this conversation, to everything that Secretary Cisneros is talking about, all of this growth and sort of how you see it right now at the beginning of this conversation.
No, thank you, Brad. And I can't agree with Secretary Cisneros more. We have 7 of the 15 fastest growing cities in the entire country. I think the Texas Triangle is a framework that we kind of underestimate a bit in a way. I think the potential there is even more so to compete, not just statewide, but also nationally. And the challenges that Secretary Cisneros puts forth and the way in which we need to challenge our leaders to think about our future is in this mega region kind of vision casting way. How are we preparing, not just really kind of preparing, but also responding to the 31.7 million people that are here today, the 4 to 5 million more people that are going to be here between now and our bicentennial in 2036, which is our namesake, and also the 82% retention rate that our state has and has historically had in terms of people that are born here or raised here tend to stay here. So how are we preparing for that with water in terms of making sure that there's security there, with energy, with all kinds of means of infrastructure? Housing affordability is something I hear more and more across the entire state as being a significant issue. But regionalism is really the way in which communities are thinking about economic competitiveness statewide and also nationally.
So, I want to ask, I've lived in Austin, I've lived in San Antonio. I'm familiar with the other cities as well. I've been there several times throughout my, many years in Texas. Austin and San Antonio have pretty distinct cultures and distinct desires and economic, industries and stuff like that. Let's say the Austin, talk about the Austin San Antonio megaregion as an example. Is it developing as a megaregion purely just because it expands and their borders get closer, or is there more cultural melding, industrial melding? How does that form?
Brad, with your permission, let me just say a quick word about the Texas Triangle before we
Please,
get
of course,
into Austin and San Antonio.
Yeah.
Because Austin and San Antonio really is in a context, which is the Texas context.
Yeah.
And the principal factor that jumps off the page when you look at Texas these days is the growth in the Texas Triangle. That would be Dallas-Fort Worth in the north, Houston and Galveston in the southeast. I state it that way because that's the way the census defines it. And then Austin and San Antonio. If you took all of the counties that surround those 3 points of the triangle, and you added them up, it's 35 counties out of 254 in the state of Texas.
Yeah.
Those 35 counties comprise 66% of the population of Texas. Imagine that. 35 counties out of 254 represent 66% of the population, just in the counties. That's not in the counties between the triangle. That's just the triangle points. And they produce 75% of the GDP of Texas. That means they're punching well above their weight in terms of the overall state. And so it's no longer just oil and gas or just ranching that defines the Texas economy. It's the Port of Houston. It's the Dallas DFW Airport. It's the North Texas region. It's the medical center in Houston. It's the University of Texas at Austin. It's the technology that surrounds that. It's the cybersecurity and biosciences in Houston, in San Antonio. That's the range of things that constitute the economy of Texas today. New media, professional and business services, hospitality, big time across this region, transportation, all of those sort of new American economy elements are here.
Yeah.
As a result, as AJ says, this is not just a local story. This is not even just a Texas story. It's not exaggerating to say a global story, because if you look across the world today, the world economy is constituted by what I might call pinnacle cities.
Yeah.
Like Tokyo, like Singapore, like Frankfurt, like Milan, like London, and of course many in the United States. But this triangle is, in global terms, one of the most dynamic places in the world today in population growth, in economic dynamic.
Yeah.
Of the Fortune 500, over a tenth of them are in Texas. We're one of 50 states, but have 10% of all the Fortune 500s and more coming.
Yeah.
Almost not a quarter of the year passes that we don't have at least one more announcement of a Fortune 500 company. And then, of course, there's all the startups that are going to be Fortune 500 companies
Yeah, of course.
someday. And so it's a phenomenal thing. And Austin and San Antonio are now taking their place as the third big global pinnacle, like Houston, like Dallas-Fort Worth. That's, I think, the underlying story here.
Yeah. So between all, and this question could be for either one of you, but say for, I know Fort Worth and Dallas has been, they've been sort of tied at the hip for a long time. I mean, geographically, they are very close, and they've grown, and that area
They're 30 miles apart.
Yeah. And they've grown, and as growing up in Texas, growing up in Austin, I always hear about Dallas, Fort Worth. It's very rarely Dallas or Fort Worth. Yeah. And now as we see other areas develop like that, Austin, San Antonio, how do you balance the different desires of those communities? Whether, and we'll talk about more about infrastructure and housing and stuff like that, but having been in Austin, been in San Antonio, the desires and the cultures are different.
Yeah. Well, going back to your earlier question, and this question, we are 75 miles apart.
Yeah.
So we are communities that each has its own character.
Yes.
But the simple truth is that what's emerging is a regional economy, a regional identity. Along the corridor, for example, San Marcos is about 72,000 people now, but growing rapidly. Hays County, in which it's located, one of the fastest growing counties in the United States. And by the way, there's a university, Texas State.
Yeah.
If I would ask most people, what do you think is the student enrollment at Texas State? Few would understand it's 41,000.
I was going to guess
students.
in the 30s, but 41,000
41,000 students. Then New Braunfels, it's growing rapidly. It's going to be, it's over 100,000 now.
Yeah.
And going to, in the time frame we're discussing here, going to be 200,000. And Comal County is one of the fastest growing counties in the country. Then you have the towns up in Williamson County, Round Rock, Leander, Pflugerville, Georgetown. Some of those are over 100,000 now. So really, it's Austin and San Antonio, which I think will maintain their identities because they have different assets that sort of they build on, right? But we're really talking about a region that's almost seamless.
Yeah.
We talk about a corridor, but it's going to be less of a corridor and more of a column of economic activity.
Yeah. AJ, did you want to expand?
No, I appreciate also what Secretary Cisneros alluded to in terms of higher education. I mean, I think it's underestimated in relation to the Carnegie R1 rated institutions that we have here in Texas. We have more now than California. We have more now than New York. So that's an extraordinary asset. And then you have our two tier one now universities, UT Austin and UT San Antonio, 70 miles apart.
Yeah,
which is an opportunity for incredible collaboration between the two and between the entire region. But you mentioned earlier about North Texas, and we Henry and I've had some conversation around the North Texas Commission, for instance, has been in existence for now over 50 plus years. The Greater Houston Partnership has been doing this in terms of regional intentional collaboration for 25 to 30 years. But you're seeing these types of regional entities pop up throughout the state. The Borderplex Alliance is not just doing this within the state, but interstate and also international with Ciudad Juarez, as well as New Mexico. And then you have the RGV partnership, and you have even Beaumont Port Arthur talking to Louisiana about how they're going to coordinate on water and other types of issues that are coming up. So this is really an opportunity from an Austin San Antonio perspective, because as Henry said, the growth is going to happen.
Yeah.
So how do we become more intentional about what we choose to look what that growth should be, versus letting it happen to us and then championing it later? I think that's a really important point. That's what separates two different types of communities: are those that allow growth to happen that they didn't necessarily intend to happen, and those that try to focus on intentionally planning that out over time.
Yeah. So,
Brad, to your question about the cultural differences, obviously the culture is decided in some sense by your origins and also by your assets.
Yeah.
So Austin will always have that flavor that is the state capital.
Yeah.
That is the University of Texas. That is the new technology boom. related to the great engineering programs at the University of Texas, and the music and sort of Texas Western vibe.
Yeah. Don't leave out the hippies.
Okay. San Antonio is a city of a long history. 1691 is when the Spanish missionaries first arrived here.
Yeah.
And we continue to recognize their presence, their arrival. For example, the San Antonio River, the missions that are a UNESCO, United Nations recognized site, 5 missions. Its Hispanic heritage is very important. Military heritage is critical. Its medical complex, which is growing internationally, it has its own job base, its own culture. These cities are substantial enough that I don't think anybody is talking about melding culture. But what is undeniable is that the region is growing, and the growth creates challenges,
Yes.
like congestion. If you came on I-35, you know what that congestion is like. And frankly, there are many times of the day where you cannot plan how long it takes to get between Austin and San Antonio. It used to be pretty clearly an hour and a half.
Yeah.
Now it could easily be 2. It could be more if there's even the slightest fender bender on I-35, and they happen all day long. It's also those 18-wheeler trucks driving along I-35. So we're going to be one of the great impediments to functioning successfully as a region is trying to depend on one spine, I-35. So we'll have to think through the transportation issues. There's the water questions, which we ought to be talking about jointly. There's the power issues, electrical power, with the advent of many, many data centers, which we need because of AI. So there's culture, and then there's also kind of economic reality. And it's very important to think through ahead of time how we're going to build the infrastructure that this region will need to be a successful region. And let me just say in closing, the swing is big. We're either a very large, fast-growing region that is disconnected, congested, growing in erratic ways, and not a very pleasant quality of life. Or we can swing to planning ahead, not having crises over water, not having to limit permitting for housing because we don't have enough water, or congestion that just drives everybody crazy, and be one of the better places to have managed its growth here when we're entering an era which is not going to end for 20 or 30 years of continued growth, and use this time to think ahead.
Yeah. So, I think we've described the situation pretty well, and we've talked about the opportunities and the challenges. Obviously with a lot of growth, there's both of those things. I think housing, being in Austin the past, many years, housing is a big issue. I know it's an issue in other cities as well. Secretary Cisneros, what housing challenges tend to pop up first, as these rapidly growing metropolitan regions, these mega cities, the triangle, all of this stuff. What comes first? What's the biggest challenge first?
I would say in housing, the biggest challenge is affordability, producing enough stock for a workforce, for an entry-level workforce, for young people coming out of college and university that we want to stay here and build their families here in the region. We need them as the professionals, as the workforce, and we just need to build a supply of housing that matches their interests. Otherwise, inadequate supply means rising prices, and rising prices can be an inhibitor to the kind of professional development that we're going to need for the long haul. When I was Secretary of HUD, I was invited to go out to Silicon Valley. They have an organization there in California called the Silicon Valley Manufacturers Association. And their purpose was to put in place the support systems that Silicon Valley needed for its growth. I told them then, if you don't deal with the housing question, it's going to be an inhibitor. Lo and behold, It's very difficult to build enough housing, obviously. If you could, wave a magic wand and end up with more units, that'd be great. But it's very hard, as we know, and you have to have builders who are building at the right price range and such. But if you fail, then you end up with what has actually happened in Silicon Valley, which is people cannot afford to go there. And therefore, the companies have said, we can't hire the workforce here.
Yeah.
Either people have to drive literally 70 miles to work before they can find a house they can afford, or they choose not to come. And that's why you're seeing the tech companies grow in North Carolina, in Austin, in Boulder, in places all over the country, because Silicon Valley is just gotten too expensive.
Yeah.
That's one problem. They've got others, congestion and other things. But they're almost a case example of, what can happen if you don't think ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. So, AJ, we hear a lot about, build more, build more, build more. And I think that's necessary. I think a lot of people agree with that. But what kind of housing is most important? Are we destined to have, big box apartments just lining the highway or the major thoroughfares throughout the cities, or McMansions that are unattainable? What does it mean to build more?
Yeah, I think there's been a move as of late to really focus on density within cities. So that you've seen like minimum lot sizes change for municipalities, for instance, from going from 6,000 feet in Austin down to 1,200, 1,500 feet, which allows to build vertically and build up and increase density.
Some people are very happy. Some people are very upset.
Yeah, but it gives, again, some diversity with what your housing opportunities are versus only having a multifamily or single family homes. So that's been an area of improvement. There's been some relaxation of zoning laws, as well as we need to expedite permitting. We need new techniques in housing construction in terms of the materials because the costs are high. 3D housing, doing that in a more frequent basis from a technological perspective. And by the way, Brad, housing is something that's universal throughout the state. As we've traveled the state, spoken with different communities. We were just in Abilene last week, and Stargate, their new data centers going in there. They've got 6,000 construction workers, descending upon the community. Yeah. And so they're challenged with where are all these individuals going to live? And by the way, they'll have 300 permanent jobs after that facility is completed, $40 billion plus investment in that particular location. And so they're challenged with where are individuals, as Secretary Cisneros said, it's about economic competitiveness for the state. When corporations or different entities go into a city, they ask, okay, do we have the workers there? Do you have the skilled workforce that we're going to need to power our business? And where are they going to live? Are they going to have an affordable place to live in terms of their quality of life and not being on the road, an hour and a half to get to and from work?
Brad, you forced a question of, what one thing do you start with? And I think affordability has to be the goal, affordability and supply.
Sure.
Right? But there are other housing challenges. For example, we have an epidemic of homelessness in Austin and in San Antonio. It's not on the scale of San Francisco or Los Angeles, but it's a serious issue, and it really kind of undercuts our claim to have a great quality of life for everyone when you walk, down the block and you encounter 5 homeless people in dire conditions. Yeah. So that's an area where I think we need to do a better job, and we can. There's a lot of proposals now for temporary housing, supportive housing, all these different approaches that define either housing for a slightly longer run, transitional housing, or housing that is immediate for people who are on the street today, have medical issues. And thank God for the religious institutions and the nonprofits that are doing that work. It's the Lord's work, bringing people in off the street and taking care of their medical needs and feeding them. So that's another issue that we're going to have, and we're going to have more of, is because the people who are in that condition migrate here just as others do.
Yeah. And I would add to the homelessness issue in terms of the economically disadvantaged too as well, Brad. And, we are the 6th now largest city in the country.
San Antonio was named the 6th largest last week.
But we're also The third, in terms of our poor population, the people that are economically disadvantaged, we're number 3 on the list of large metro cities with a population that is in severe poverty. And so that economic mobility, so it's not just housing affordability, but how do we put policies into place that increase the economic mobility for those individuals as well to move into the middle and upper middle class over time. And I would argue we do that through our educational system and our post-secondary credentialing opportunities that exist to give people family-sustaining wages.
Yeah.
AJ, that's a really good point, and I'm glad you mentioned it because I've dedicated most of my working life to the idea that if you create jobs and economic development, it will raise the standard of living, it will raise incomes and family budgets, and people will advance. And San Antonio is an example of where that has happened. It's actually happened. The numbers of people who've moved into the middle class, the breakdown of the old housing segregation that we had here. Today, people of all ethnic groups live in all different parts of the city. I see it when I pick up the paper every day and read the sports, the local high school sports, and see who's scored a goal in soccer or who hit a basketball. And it's, people from all ethnic groups in every part of the city, in every one of our school districts, which is great. But it's not enough because we can't bring really the most generational poverty into the mainstream without the special efforts that AJ has described. That's why San Antonio has focused on things like pre-K education. We actually passed a bond issue, a sales tax, to support pre-K education under Mayor Castro. For example, we have Ready to Work, which we passed under Mayor Nuremberg, a program during the pandemic to help people who've been dislocated and get new skills so they can get back into the workforce at higher wages. So those kinds of progressive, positive things, and Austin is good at it. Austin does its share of
colleges
things.
as well. Alamo
Colleges is essentially free for people at a certain income level, and it gets awards as one of the best community colleges in the country. They have what they call the Alamo Promise. So those kinds of things should be part of our regional discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. AJ, when you talked about, I think you said you were in Abilene last week. When you're traveling around the state talking to business leaders, how often does housing affordability come up?
It comes up essentially as much as water comes up. And it kind of varies in the degrees of severity depending on where we're visiting. What's also interesting around the state is just the level of transportation improvements that are happening. I think, what Prop 1 and 7 that essentially unleashed transportation funding throughout the state and planning for that. You're seeing that Band-Aid getting ripped across the entire state in terms of construction happening, which is a good sign in terms of addressing the issues. But housing affordability, it comes up in every single community. Water is something where we don't have enough or don't take ours. Those are the two arguments that you generally hear when you're traveling the state as well. Of course, workforce is an issue throughout in terms of attainability. Healthcare affordability is also something that's rising in people's minds. And things like homeowners insurance are top of people's minds across the state. Things that are really impacting their pocketbooks essentially on a weekly and monthly basis.
Brad, let me take the conversation to a different point,
please,
if I may. We've been talking about the scale of the growth, which is real, and we've been talking about the scale of the problems, which are real. But we haven't really talked about concrete solutions. And since we did the book, Megaregions, I've had a lot of conversations with people about the water issue, the congestion and transportation issues, the electric power issues, the training issues, the housing issues. But at the end of those conversations, it always boils down to, well, what are we going to do and who is going to do it?
I have those questions.
And what I have concluded is we have to have some kind of venue, some kind of vehicle where leaders from throughout the region, not just Austin and San Antonio, not just Travis and Bexar County, but the multiple counties that constitute this mega region, to talk for the first time together in a concerted way about addressing those issues. I had the opportunity, and AJ has also, to know Chris Wallace, who runs the North Texas Commission.
Okay.
He used to be the head of the Texas Association of Business. His next job was head of this 50-year initiative in Dallas, which was put in place when they built DFW Airport to basically explain to the world that they should use DFW Airport. And it was so successful, we now know that as one of the busiest airports in the United States and a truly global airport, that it's so successful that it started to become the voice for the region as a whole. How are we going to build rail that connects the region? How are we going to get water all the way from Oklahoma to feed a thirsty region, to provide water? And I'm convinced that the next step for us in this region is to create a structure, a partnership, an alliance like the North Texas Commission for this region. And I find a lot of acceptance of that idea on the part of leaders within the region, on the part of business people within the region, university presidents, et cetera, public officials, because everybody recognizes if we don't have a venue to talk about these things, if we don't have a venue to put ideas on the table of how we work together, if we can't advocate for these things commonly before the legislature, before the Congress, put together our delegations to work on our regional questions, then we're all going to work on our own things, but we're not going to address the big regional questions.
Yeah.
That's what I appreciated most about Secretary Cisneros' book, was that it laid out the opportunities and challenges and even the history of some of the localities that we're talking about, but it also had a call to action at the end of that book and said, we've got to be more intentional about our strategy and convening to discuss these issues of importance moving forward. And I'd like to say, characterize it as moving with urgency before we get to the emergency.
Yeah.
In other words. And so I think that's where the book really has that call to action of organizational effort, and we're moving in that direction.
Yeah, so there's water, energy, transportation, airports, all of these big infrastructure issues. Rail. I keep hearing about a potential rail between Austin and San Antonio, and I think I've heard about that my whole life. Is that ever going to happen?
Yeah, I think it's going to happen. I think we've got leaders like Andy Brown in Travis County, county judge, and Judge Sakai here in Bexar County, who are talking about it in a more robust way. There have been multiple efforts. The Austin-San Antonio Corridor Council has championed what they call the Lone Star District and other strategies which haven't worked out because they were thinking of the existing right-of-way on the Union Pacific tracks, and Union Pacific doesn't want to have anybody else on those tracks, particularly passengers mixed with cargo. So that's been an issue. But I think people are now talking in really interesting ways, like, well, why are we fixated on IH-35? Why do we run the rail on SH-130, where there's plenty right-of-way, and then reconnect back into the two major cities, but connect the region with rail that, you could be in Austin in a dependable hour.
Sure.
Plus, hour 15, something like that, to the center of the two cities. Yes, I do believe rail not only has to happen, but I think it will happen. As I said, we have all the potential to be one of the most prosperous regions in the world, but we can't function as a region if we can't have mobility that connects us. And 35 is not the answer.
And just real quick, do you think that, we're talking about a rail between Austin and San Antonio? I think that makes sense for a lot of people. And you're right, it would make it a dependable hour, maybe less.
Yeah.
A boy can dream.
Yeah.
But what about, say Austin to Dallas or Dallas to Houston, that whole Texas triangle?
Yeah, I think that in due course will happen. I mean, Dallas and Houston have been working very, very detailed and aggressive strategies to build that rail. This administration was not particularly helpful in getting it done. there's some issues related to right of way and that, but they'd already had identified a considerable amount of the right of way and identified sources of capital. So they were well on their way. They had the rolling stock identified, Japanese rail cars, et cetera. So I think it's a matter of time, but why don't we work on what we can do, which is right here in front of us right now, and actually set the example for what then can be done in the rest of the state.
And I agree with Henry. I think there's are there some other solutions that we might see in the short term that may come up with technology? For instance, are there opportunities with advanced air mobility that TxDOT's already been looking at? Are there opportunities for autonomous shuttles between the cities? You see autonomous 18-wheelers on SH-130 currently.
Sure.
So the technology is improving as such and as quickly as such, where we may have the opportunity to have all the above approach. With maglev trains, with advanced air mobility, with point-to-point air travel between Austin and San Antonio, which doesn't exist today. And those kinds of, we really need to take in all of the above approaches take to mobility. I was flying from Dallas to Austin, and as Henry said, all these outlying areas, whether it's Buda or all these other places, these smaller cities. I mean, it's vast civilization of lights. I was traveling at night, and then you see this one little string connecting the whole thing, and that was I-35.
Yeah.
So it's something that we've got to do more about.
It is a good way to understand the region is to fly in at night and see one seamless connection of lights from north of Austin to south of San Antonio, where we're going to be 8.3 million people.
Mm-hmm. So, obviously mobility, water, you mentioned earlier, it's either, we don't have enough or don't take mine. And, following the news and following what's going on, there are all of these problems that we're facing. Mm-hmm. But it feels like, and correct me if I'm wrong, it feels like there needs to be state level intervention, not necessarily just at this county or city levels.
Or regional.
But so what is from a state policy level, what can be done to support all this growth?
Well, it is important to bring the state into this conversation, which is why in these discussions that we're having about creating a Central Texas Alliance, the state is invited to participate. Adriana Cruz, the head of economic development for the state, works directly for Governor Abbott, is in the discussions, and because we're going to need to have a strong communication and strong contact with the governor. We want to avoid issues that would pit this region against the other regions of the state, because then the politics gets really tough.
Yeah.
But I think it's pretty clear this is in the best interest of Texas to do good planning for the Central Texas region. The simple truth is the economy of Texas is no longer that old economy that I described earlier, ranching and oil and gas. It's a new economy. Mm-hmm. And to the degree that these metros are successful, the state of Texas is successful. Revenues, state budget, they depend on the revenues from this economic engine that is the Texas urban centers. And Austin, San Antonio is an example of that. It would be a tragedy to, in any way, stifle the growth opportunities, the income opportunities, the revenue opportunities that come from a healthy Austin, San Antonio region. The state is going to need that in the long haul.
Yeah. AJ?
And statewide, it's a $154 billion problem that we've identified at Texas 2036 in terms of our water supply, in terms of adequacy,
and that's
statewide.
Statewide, all counties.
Aging, deteriorating water infrastructure throughout the state. We leak about the size of Lake Buchanan every single year in water because of our leaky pipes throughout the entire state.
Okay. Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah. Well. Yeah. I mean, I think I remember reading in Austin alone, it's something like a Lake Austin level or something like that. So
so it's a $112 billion funding gap as well that we've identified. Although that's now being addressed with this latest voter approved and legislature approved, the $22.5 billion that was put into the Texas Water Fund to try to begin to address this issue. We had $1 billion, which we called a figurative drop in the bucket, they moved forward with a lot more resources towards it. And I think that'll do what happened with transportation, which I mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
In terms of it helps with planning and predictability and prioritization of where those water projects ought to go. But you have to have the funding in order to have the resource and putting that into place in terms of planning.
The example of what happens when you don't plan water is what's happening in Corpus right now.
Yeah, I've read about that.
Which is really serious. They are looking at a red line in November that will be the first time that their water needs exceed their total water availability.
Yeah.
So they're looking desperately for surface water that they've not been able to get before, for converting brackish water, for desalination plants. They've got several under proposal now. But the dilemma is that Corpus Christi has some huge water users in all those refineries that are the base of its economy. They need water. If they don't have water, they can't be there. So they have to have water, which then crowds out water that's available for the residents, the citizens. Some of these things are expensive. They're going to cost a lot of money, and residents don't want to pay those higher rates for their own water, the refineries' water, and the new capital needs. So that's an example where the state has a role to play and is playing a role, but it's literally an emergency. Mm-hmm. And we just can't afford to have Central Texas be in that kind of an emergency. We've got to act before we reach that level of water shortage.
Yeah. For all these infrastructure problems, whether it's housing, energy, water, whatever it is, transportation, and I know that, bringing up the Corpus Christi example, the refineries needing so much water reminds me of all the data centers, and that's a big story now, how much water they're going to need.
And power.
As well. You've studied megaregions across the globe. Mm-hmm. Is there something that Texas can learn from those other more established megaregions that, I guess, Fort Worth and Dallas-Fort Worth is pretty established, of course, but Austin and San Antonio is growing, that the Texas Triangle is growing. Something that we could learn from those other places.
Absolutely. And let me just start by saying, you mentioned North Texas, pretty established, but that's not an accident.
Sure.
They planned it. I've been all over the country in my various jobs, 200 different cities just as Secretary of Housing in every one of the 50 states. And what I have seen in terms of regional planning, the North Texas region may be the best in the country. And you don't hear of crises related to transportation or water or other things because they have worked on it and because they have planned it. Yeah. And they've succeeded. So, somebody asked me the other day, what's the definition of success in this urban and regional business? The answer is for people not to notice there's any problem. You're not going to get great kudos and praise for things going well, but they operate, they work, right? When you have a crisis, like Phoenix did a couple of years ago where they had to ration housing permits because they didn't have enough water, then you know that people weren't planning. That's what we have to avoid in this region. But yes, the answer to your question, there are things we can learn. We can learn to act before the fact. That's one thing. We can learn that there are all kinds of new technologies that we can deploy, like desal, for example, and Corpus is going to have to do that, and new approaches to energy generation, et cetera. But those things go together. Thinking ahead and employing new technologies to solve some of these issues require dialogue, conversation, and that's the first order of business. With respect to your point about other places, in our book, we cite places that were once the diamond in the American economy. They were the engines pulling the whole American economy. In the Northeast, it was textiles and steel. In New England, that moment passed. They weren't able to keep up with the technology. They no longer are leaders of the national economy. Then after World War II, during World War II and after World War II, it was Detroit and the industrial heartland. Detroit once had 2 million people. It's down to 650,000. Yeah. They had 15 automobile plants. It's down to 1. They lost their moment because they didn't keep up with the technology. The Japanese came in with less gas guzzling cars, and the market, they missed the market. Silicon Valley, I mentioned to you, I was out there, and they've had their moment of technological, and it continues because they've been very, very good about raising capital and venture capital for new innovations, but they're hitting the lack of housing, exorbitant costs for housing, traffic congestion, et cetera, because they didn't plan those things. So now we have a moment which could be equally significant in national terms. This region could be the premier destination in the United States, the premier example of economic performance for a region. That moment may be coming for us. Some would say it's already here. I think it's close. But just like everyone else had their moment and lost it because they didn't think ahead, that's what we have to avoid.
Yeah, absolutely. AJ, is there anything you wanted to add?
I don't think I can add anything better than what Henry just described.
Well, that's totally okay. So, I think it's a good segue into sort of the global, the global connection here. Texas does compete globally on a lot of different levels. I think this has come up so many times in the podcast, and I can never remember what the number is. We're like the 5th largest economy, I think, in the world, something like that, give or take 1 or 2. I don't know. I should have that memorized by now. But
I do know that the economies of the individual cities in the triangle are, I think Houston is the size of the economy of Belgium. Dallas-Fort Worth is an economy the size of Sweden. San Antonio, Austin today is an economy the size of Egypt. I mean, we're the size of countries.
Yeah.
Countries.
Right.
Here within this little triangle of 200 miles on each leg.
Yeah, we have a lot going for us. We got a lot going on. It's a happening place. When we think about this larger the Texas Triangle, kind of going back to what I was asking before, as the clashing of cultures, the different industries and things like that, we're obviously competing globally, and I want to talk about that. But I also want to talk about the competition between each other. Mm-hmm. I think it's good. I think it's good to have some competition between the different cities to try to attract people for different ways, housing or culture or whatever. What does that competition look like, and how does it help us grow?
I don't see competition between Austin and San Antonio because
you think San Antonio's that's good, huh?
No, it's just that we're so different.
Yeah. Well, you guys have the Spurs.
That's true. And Austin has a soccer team.
We have Austin FC. Yep.
And my great hope is that one day we'll together have NFL team in this region. I think Jerry Jones in Dallas has something to say about it.
Does the stadium go in New Braunfels or
somewhere in the middle?
Okay.
Or an MLB.
And Major League Baseball.
Yeah.
And Major League Baseball. Yep. Those things will happen. They will happen. It's destined to happen. Maybe not in my lifetime, but it's going to happen. So I don't see competition because we have different strengths.
Yep.
And we go after different things. The technology in Austin is unmatched. We have such a head start in the biosciences here with medical schools, research institutions, military medicine, et cetera. We have 180,000 people working in biomedical here in San Antonio. Austin just created the medical school here in the last decade or so. It's going to grow, and it's going to grow fast, and it's going to work off the University of Texas, and that's all good. But it's a big field. There's room for everybody. So I don't see competition. I just think we've got to focus on collaboration. There was a time when, there was some denigration of each other. People talked about, Austin and keep Austin weird.
Yeah.
And San Antonio, large poor city of with a Hispanic heritage, so different that they really couldn't work together. I just don't see that. I think we just have to realize, look at where this region is going to develop geographically, and it's in everybody's benefit when incomes rise, when careers are possible, when wealth is created, when quality of life and options in life are improved. And I think that's what we have to keep in our eyesight.
Yeah.
I'd agree. I think you could look at this from two lenses, Brad. One could be competitive, and one could be complementary.
Yeah.
In so many different ways.
I mean that in the kindest way, by
right?
the way. The competition is good.
Well, and I think that's
I get
right. I mean, I think that's right. But also the opportunities for, like I mentioned earlier, UT Austin, UT San Antonio being as close as they are within the same system, be collaborating on research in a more robust way. Alamo colleges and Austin community colleges thinking about and sharing best practices about how to increase the opportunities for post-secondary education. The school districts in both different areas doing the same. The RMAs, the Regional Mobility Authorities, or the Council of Governments. It's kind of what Henry was saying. If we have a venue for those different entities to collaborate, share best practices, then they truly do become complementary. It's not just by accident. It's by a force of will that these two say, you know what, you're doing that better than I'm doing that. But I can do this better than you can do this.
Yeah.
So how do we do that together in a better way?
And people could talk about competition, and there will be some competition, but you mark my words, it's because we do things differently that we both win. For example, people will say we compete over food, but I'll concede Austin has great barbecue. San Antonio has great Mexican food.
Yeah,
That's
you
not
do.
We're going to get into
competition.
taco argument here?
Yeah,
We
right.
might.
Exactly. Well, music. Austin has great country and western music. San Antonio has great Tejano music. That's not competition. It's complementary. So there's many other fields where we are that way.
Austin's breakfast tacos are better. I don't know. if do we need to spend another hour on that? I'm happy to.
We can talk just about the beans alone within the tacos, Brad. How about
that? So what can let's talk about, the workforce, as we're sort of, we're coming up towards the end a little bit, but talking about workforce development and education. I know a lot of your work on the Texas Triangle has talked about, has emphasized that. How important is talent development and determining sort of how the region thrives?
Totally important. I mean, really important. It's hard to get a handle on it when you're talking, crisis language on water and transportation, but it's just as preeminent.
Yeah.
Because the many jobs that are coming require a different level of training. Luckily, we have fantastic institutions at work. The University of Texas in higher education, Texas State, UTSA, A&M San Antonio, and great private institutions like St. Edward's at one end, Georgetown, Southwestern in Georgetown, here, Trinity, St. Mary's, Our Lady of the Lake, Incarnate Word, lots of human capital efforts. And I'm so proud of our community college here that's won awards as the best community college in the country. Mm-hmm. We never were there before. We're getting those awards now. Austin Community College, multiple iterations of it, and also workforce training. But it is important, and we need to emphasize that and then fund it because it's key. It's absolutely, totally key to the vision of this region.
Yeah. So
90% of our kids are graduating high school right now, and only 36% are achieving some type of post-secondary credential. And what Henry alludes to is that 70-somewhat% of the jobs of the future are going to require a post-secondary credential by 2036, for instance. So that's an extraordinary gap that we've got to close. You got to start with math and reading scores, and I'm sure you talked a little bit about this on your education podcast.
I've talked about it many times. Yep, absolutely.
How critical it is in terms of workforce development and our ability to sustain the future. So it's not just infrastructure, but actually human infrastructure that we've got to develop as well.
Yeah.
And everybody in the country is talking about AI and how it's going to displace people. I was in a conference last week in Washington where Gina Raimundo, the former Secretary of Commerce and Governor of Rhode Island, is now starting an initiative related to preparing people for AI. What does that mean? Well, we don't know what it means to prepare people for AI, but we know that it means to prepare people for optionality, to be capable, to pick and choose of whatever AI creates in terms of job opportunities. We know one thing: people have to be literate, have to be computer literate, have to be technologically savvy, have to be mathematically capable, etc. So that's absolutely key.
Yeah. So as we wrap up, AJ, as Texas approaches the bicentennial 2036, what should the Texas legislature, the on a state policy level, but maybe more importantly, Texans just in general, what should they be watching and focusing on to make sure that we're managing the growth successfully between now and the bicentennial?
Well, I was going to suggest let's start with AI answering the question of where the best breakfast tacos are.
You want AI to decide?
Just kidding,
I will
Brad.
just tell you this.
I mean, whatever AI says.
So, I mean, going back to the earlier question and comment, I think, again, water is going to be critical. If you don't have water, you have one problem.
Yeah.
in terms of our metrics and
Almost no other problem matters if you don't have water.
Right.
Yeah.
And I was talking to one of the graduate students at Texas A&M just yesterday, and he was working on water quality. And so water quality is important, but you have to have water quantity first. And that's what we discuss in terms of supply, transportation, and connecting our state. We're such an expansive state, right? I mean, San Antonio is 500 square miles plus. Austin is close to 400 square miles plus. So we are really spread out. So the efficiency in which we can connect our people to get to their work, to get to their culture activities. I love the project that Henry's working on in terms of the Arboretum in San Antonio and connecting recreational and physical fitness activities, as well as the Great Springs project that the book mentions that connects San Antonio and Austin in a more robust way from a hiking and biking trail. And that could be the next Camino de Santiago, for instance, that has happened in Spain and Portugal. So there are so many opportunities there, Brad. I think we've got to keep our eye on the ball on the basics in terms of education, like we talked about earlier, in terms of water, in terms of transportation, energy. Broadband expansion is another area that we did a great job in funding in 2021, but haven't done our best to fully implement and fund it going forward. So those are the kinds of issues that I would really emphasize moving forward is in housing affordability, health insurance, et cetera. But Henry laid out the opportunities for challenges. There's so many more great opportunities for collaboration, and we could do a better job of it.
Okay. Secretary Cisneros, final question for you. We're going to add millions of people in Texas between now and 2036. If we get this period of growth right, what could Texas become?
Texas could be a national exemplar of how you do quality growth and development, bring people along economically, create a strong middle class, great quality of life with open space and parks and lakes, and that's what Texas could look like. That's what the Triangle could look like. That's what Austin, San Antonio could look like. Imagine places like Singapore, which are basically a nation state, and just it's an exemplar of bringing people along and creating economic wealth for a broad swath of the population. When you think going forward of places that are the pinnacles of the world economy, I mentioned some of them earlier, like Frankfurt and London and Milan and Singapore and Tokyo and Seoul, Shanghai. That's the league that the Texas Triangle can play in. Yeah, I think.
Yeah. Well, it's a great vision. Well, Secretary Cisneros and AJ Rodriguez, thank you all so much for both being here. I really appreciate the conversation. I had a lot of fun and learned a lot. Texas is growing faster than almost any state in the country. Ensuring that growth remains dynamic, affordable, and resilient will require thoughtful planning and coordination across regions. These are exactly the kinds of long-term challenges Texas 2036 studies as the state approaches its bicentennial. To learn more about the research shaping these conversations, visit texas2036.org. Thank you for listening to the Future of Texas podcast on Texas Talks.